Imagine a city where the victorious kings displayed the rotting, impaled bodies of their enemies along the towering city walls as gruesome trophies. A place where women were coerced into participating in temple rituals so depraved that even the mere recounting of them would send shivers down your spine. Envision a metropolis so steeped in wickedness, so utterly morally bankrupt, that its practices of torture and brutality became legendary, whispered in hushed tones throughout the ancient world. This is Nineveh, a name synonymous with decadence and cruelty. Nineveh was a sprawling, opulent city where high priestesses conducted forbidden ceremonies within the hallowed halls of the temples dedicated to Ishtar, the goddess of both love and war, a terrifying duality that reflected the city's own fractured soul. The elite, the wealthy and powerful, maintained vast harems, some boasting hundreds of women treated as mere possessions, their lives dictated by the whims of their masters. And shockingly, within these walls, cruelty was not merely tolerated. It was celebrated, openly flaunted, and even elevated to the status of a virtue. The very kings of Nineveh, consumed by hubris and a thirst for notoriety, commissioned elaborate carvings on the walls of their palaces, proudly showcasing their acts of atrocity and barbarism. These were not mere artistic renderings, they were boastful declarations of their cruelty, a challenge to any who dared question their authority. What transpired behind those imposing 30-meter-high defensive walls was so deeply disturbing, so profoundly offensive to the moral fabric of the universe, that divine intervention became not only necessary, but inevitable. Today, you will uncover the shocking, unvarnished truth about this city, a place the Bible unequivocally labeled the City of Blood. This is not just a historical account. It is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and moral decay, a story that may resonate far more closely with the challenges and temptations of our own modern world than you might initially believe. Before we delve deeper, I invite you to share in the comments below from which city or region you are watching. Consider your own community, its values, its challenges, and ask yourself, does it, in any way, mirror the perilous path that Nineveh once trod? Are there echoes of Nineveh's corruption, its disregard for human dignity in the world around us today? To truly grasp the significance of Nineveh's story, we must first understand the strategic location where divine providence chose to establish this extraordinary yet ultimately doomed city. Picture, if you will, the fertile lands of what we now know as northern Iraq, not far from the modern city of Mosul. Here, in this cradle of civilization, rose one of the most influential and formidable metropolises of the ancient world. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom and foresight, strategically positioned Nineveh on the life-giving banks of the majestic Tigris River. This was no ordinary waterway. It was a veritable lifeline, a source of sustenance and prosperity that transformed an otherwise arid and unforgiving region into a veritable paradise on earth. The waters of the Tigris not only guaranteed the survival of the burgeoning population, providing them with essential drinking water and sanitation, but they also enabled the large-scale irrigation of vast agricultural fields, allowing for bountiful harvests and a thriving economy. Furthermore, the river served as a crucial artery for trade, facilitating the movement of goods and ideas to and from distant lands, connecting Nineveh to a vast network of commerce and cultural exchange. It's crucial to understand a fascinating detail about Nineveh's rise to prominence. It did not begin as the undisputed capital of the mighty Assyrian Empire. In its early days, it was merely one city among many others scattered throughout the Mesopotamian region, a relatively unremarkable settlement struggling for survival. However, God had a far grander, more significant purpose in mind for this seemingly ordinary place. Over the centuries, From approximately 3000 BC onward, Nineveh steadily grew in size and influence, slowly but surely developing into the epicenter of the most powerful and expansive empire the world had ever known up to that point. Around 700 BC, during the reign of the ambitious and ruthless king Sennacherib, Nineveh reached the zenith of its power and splendor. The king, driven by a relentless ambition and a desire to leave an indelible mark on history, made the momentous decision to transform Nineveh into the undisputed capital of the Assyrian Empire. What transpired next was nothing short of extraordinary, a testament to the vision and resources that Sennacherib poured into his grand project. Imagine an ancient city boasting wide, meticulously paved avenues, lined with bustling marketplaces and grand public squares. Picture majestic palaces adorned with intricate stone reliefs that vividly recounted tales of imperial conquests, divine favor, and the unyielding power of the Assyrian kings. The famed Hanging Gardens of Nineveh, a testament to engineering prowess and horticultural artistry, were so breathtakingly beautiful that they rivaled the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a wonder of the ancient world. The city's sophisticated water system was a masterpiece of ancient engineering, a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Assyrian people. Through a network of aqueducts and canals, meticulously designed and expertly constructed, the life-giving waters of the Tigris River were efficiently distributed throughout the entire city, ensuring that every inhabitant, from the wealthiest nobleman to the humblest peasant, had access to clean, fresh water, a revolutionary concept for the time and a significant factor in the city's overall health and sanitation. The farmers surrounding the city, benefiting from the advanced irrigation techniques pioneered by Assyrian engineers, cultivated a wide variety of grains, fruits, and vegetables in the fertile fields, ensuring a stable and abundant food supply for the city's ever-growing population. These agricultural innovations allowed Nineveh to not only sustain itself, but also to generate a surplus that could be traded with other regions, further bolstering its economic power. However, what truly set Nineveh apart from its contemporaries and cemented its position as a global hub was its strategic location as a center of commerce. Caravans of merchants, laden with exotic goods and precious commodities, traversed vast distances from every corner of the known world, converging on Nineveh like iron filings to a magnet. From the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean Sea to the distant reaches of the Persian Gulf, from the Anatolian highlands to the Persian plains, merchants flocked to Nineveh, eager to participate in its vibrant and lucrative marketplace. Within the bustling streets of Nineveh, one could find a dazzling array of goods and products sourced from far-flung lands, a testament to the city's extensive trade networks. Gold from distant mines, ivory from the tusks of African elephants, fragrant spices from the exotic lands of the East, and finely woven textiles from skilled artisans all passed through the city's gates, enriching its coffers and solidifying its reputation as a global center of trade and exchange. The grandeur of Nineveh, however, was not solely confined to its bustling commerce and impressive infrastructure. The city also emerged as a significant center of knowledge and culture, attracting scholars, artists, and intellectuals from across the ancient world. King Ashurbanipal, a ruler renowned for his intellectual curiosity and his patronage of the arts, constructed one of the first and largest libraries in the ancient world, a repository of knowledge that rivaled even the most prestigious institutions of its time. This magnificent library housed thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, meticulously inscribed with texts covering a vast range of subjects, including medicine, astronomy, literature, and religion. It was as if God, in his own mysterious way, had allowed all the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world to converge in a single extraordinary place, a testament to the potential for human achievement, and a reflection of the divine spark within humanity. To give you a better sense of the sheer scale and magnitude of this ancient metropolis, consider the fact that its main defensive walls formed a circuit of approximately 12 kilometers, over 7 miles, encompassing an area large enough to house hundreds of thousands of people. This was an astounding feat of urban planning and engineering, especially considering that most cities of that era typically held only a few thousand inhabitants. The sheer size of Nineveh was a clear indication of its power, its wealth, and its influence over the surrounding region. If this history has touched your heart in some way, if you feel a sense of awe at the grandeur and complexity of this ancient civilization, then I encourage you to comment now with the phrase, "Jesus is greater." Let us collectively proclaim that just as God transformed an entire city through the message of a single prophet, He can transform your life today through the power of Jesus Christ. And please, don't forget to leave a like on this video so that even more people can discover the transformative power of God's grace and mercy. But do not be deceived, my beloved friends. Beneath all the glittering grandeur and material prosperity, a dark and sinister undercurrent flowed through the streets of Nineveh, a hidden reality that we must confront and understand. We must delve into the shadows and uncover the moral decay that ultimately led to the city's downfall. In the next chapter of this exploration, we will discover how the people of Nineveh, intoxicated by their power and wealth, used their resources in a way that deeply grieved the heart of God. This is not merely a historical account, it is a cautionary tale, filled with invaluable lessons that remain relevant to our own lives and societies today. Let us now delve into one of the darkest and most disturbing aspects of Nineveh's history, something that helps us to understand why God found it necessary to intervene so dramatically in the affairs of that city. Behind all the outward displays of greatness and opulence, a deeply flawed and corrupt religious system took root, gradually but surely alienating the people from the true and living God. At the very heart of Nineveh, towering over the city like ominous sentinels, stood enormous temples dedicated to a pantheon of different gods and goddesses. The most prominent and influential of these temples was dedicated to Ishtar, the complex and contradictory deity who was simultaneously revered as the goddess of both love and war. Imagine the spiritual confusion and moral ambiguity that this duality engendered, a single divinity representing both the most tender of emotions and the most brutal of human endeavors. The Ninevites also worshipped Nabu, who was considered the god of wisdom and writing, and Shamash, the god of the sun and of justice. However, even these seemingly benevolent deities were often associated with practices and beliefs that were deeply problematic and morally questionable. The Book of Nahum, a powerful prophetic text, reveals the stark truth about these religious practices. In Nahum 3:4, the city is likened to a seductive prostitute, a mistress of sorceries, highlighting how idolatry and false worship had completely corrupted the very fabric of Nineveh's society. This was not merely a matter of theological disagreement, it was a pervasive moral rot that infected every aspect of life. The temples were not simply places of worship, they were centers where practices that God abhors took place freely and openly, shielded from scrutiny by the veneer of religious legitimacy. What is most heartbreaking and deeply troubling is how this devotion to false gods directly impacted the daily lives of the people of Nineveh, shaping their values, their relationships, and their understanding of the world around them. The Ninevites were led to believe that they needed to perform elaborate and often degrading rituals in order to appease their divinities and ensure their favor. In the temples of Ishtar, for example, ceremonies took place that blended elements of adoration with immoral and deeply disturbing practices. People were tragically deceived into thinking that they were serving the gods, when in reality, they were drifting further and further away from the true Creator, the source of all goodness and truth. The very structure and layout of the city reflected this distorted devotion. Nineveh was meticulously planned with grand avenues that led directly to the main temples, emphasizing the centrality of religious worship in the lives of its citizens. The famed Gate of Nineveh, a monumental construction that served as the city's main entrance, was lavishly decorated with religious symbols and images of Assyrian gods, a constant reminder of the divinities that were believed to protect and guide the city. The royal palaces, the seats of power and authority, also contained chapels dedicated to the various deities, illustrating how religion and political power were inextricably intertwined in Nineveh's society. The rulers of the city actively promoted and participated in the worship of these false gods, further solidifying their own legitimacy and control. However, the most egregious and unforgivable aspect of this corrupted society was the way it treated its most vulnerable members. In Nahum 3:1, the city is explicitly called a city of bloodshed, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. The poor were exploited, the foreigners were mistreated, and violence was justified as something pleasing to the gods. The Assyrian Empire, with Nineveh at its heart, became infamous for its unparalleled cruelty towards conquered peoples, often enslaving entire populations and subjecting them to unimaginable horrors. The prophet Nahum powerfully reveals that corruption had permeated every level of Nineveh's society, from the highest-ranking officials in the palace to the humblest merchants in the marketplace. People had normalized practices that God unequivocally condemns: the exploitation of the poor, the violence against the defenseless, the insatiable greed that drove so many to commit acts of injustice. All of these sins were viewed as a normal and acceptable part of life in Nineveh. Archaeologists have unearthed disturbing reliefs on the walls of the palaces, graphic depictions of how the Assyrians treated their prisoners. These are not sanitized or romanticized depictions. They are raw, brutal, and deeply unsettling images that help us understand why God so vehemently condemned Nineveh as a city of blood. The military elite prided themselves on their brutality, considering it a form of honoring their warrior gods, a way of demonstrating their strength and intimidating their enemies. The wide, well-paved streets of Nineveh, which could have been places of justice and prosperity for all, instead became scenes of oppression and injustice. The marketplaces, which should have been spaces of fair and equitable trade, turned into dens of exploitation where the wealthy preyed upon the poor and vulnerable, enriching themselves at their expense. The temples, which could have drawn people closer to the true God, were instead transformed into centers of perverse practices that deeply grieved him. If you are wondering how a city so prosperous and advanced could have strayed so far from God's path, then I urge you to comment with the prayer, "Lord, guard my heart." This is a declaration that you do not want to repeat the mistakes of the Ninevites, that you desire to remain faithful to God's teachings and to live a life that is pleasing in His sight. And later in this video, you will discover how the powerful rulers of Nineveh maintained harems with hundreds of women, how young women were forced into arranged marriages for political gain, and the dark, sinister role played by the priestesses in the pagan temples. This is a story of power, corruption, and the tragic consequences of turning away from God. Behind the imposing, seemingly impenetrable walls of Nineveh, life throbbed with an intense rhythm in the city's bustling streets. Merchants haggled over goods from distant lands, ranging from fine silks to exotic spices. The marketplaces were centers of frenetic activity, where skilled artisans crafted jewelry, ceramics, and textiles that were known and admired throughout the ancient world. Agriculture flourished in the fertile lands surrounding the city, meticulously irrigated by a complex system of canals that originated from the Tigris River. Farmers cultivated barley, wheat, and a diverse variety of fruits and vegetables that nourished the urban population, ensuring a stable food supply and contributing to the city's overall prosperity. In the workshops of the artisans, the sound of hammers and chisels echoed as they created masterpieces in metal, stone, and wood, adorning the city with beautiful works of art. The educational system of Nineveh was remarkably advanced for its time. In schools for scribes, young men learned the art of cuneiform writing, mathematics, and literature, preserving knowledge for future generations. The famous library of King Ashurbanipal contained thousands of clay tablets, meticulously preserving knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and history. However, this outward prosperity masked a darker truth. Nineveh was the center of Assyrian military power, a force that terrorized the ancient world. The Assyrian army was known for its calculated brutality, employing tactics of psychological terror to subdue its enemies. Historical records and stone reliefs reveal horrifying practices such as the impalement of prisoners and the mass deportation of conquered populations, designed to instill fear and crush any resistance. Part 5. Approx. 1,000 words. The Assyrian warriors were trained from a young age in advanced combat techniques, instilling in them a ruthless efficiency. The city's arsenal included sophisticated siege machines, and its military tactics were studied and feared by all neighboring nations. Nineveh maintained an extensive military intelligence system, with spies and messengers bringing information from every corner of the empire. It is within this context that we encounter the biblical narrative about Nineveh. The Book of Jonah presents a crucial moment in the city's history when God sent Jonah to preach in Nineveh. The city was at the height of its power, but also at the peak of its wickedness. The biblical text describes a population of more than 120,000 people who could not discern between their right hand and their left hand, a reference to their spiritual blindness. Jonah's message was direct and uncompromising. In 40 days, Nineveh shall be overthrown. What happened next was extraordinary. From the king to the lowliest citizen, the entire city turned to God in repentance. They declared a fast and dressed themselves in sackcloth, external signs of a deep inner transformation. Faced with this genuine repentance, God demonstrated his mercy and spared the city. However, the prophecies of Nahum and Isaiah reveal that this change was not permanent. Nahum describes Nineveh as a city of bloodshed, full of lies and plunder. His prophecies detailing how the city would revert to its wicked ways, eventually leading to its destruction. Isaiah includes Nineveh among the nations that would face divine judgment, highlighting how its pride and violence would lead to its downfall. If this video is opening your eyes to better understand biblical history, type in the comments the phrase, "The Word of God is life." In the next chapter, we will explore an even more surprising aspect of life in Nineveh, how women lived in this society and the obscure practices that took place in the city's temples, revealing a story that the archaeologists discovered about the lives of women in Nineveh, which reveals a profoundly unequal social system. The records found on the clay tablets of Ashurbanipal's library show us how Assyrian society structured the relationships between men and women, creating a detailed portrait of female life at that time. In Nineveh society, a woman's social position was determined primarily by her relationship with the men in her family. The patriarchal system was deeply rooted in Assyrian culture, where women were considered property, first of their fathers and then of their husbands. This reality was reflected in the city's laws and customs, which gave the men almost total authority over family decisions. Archaeological discoveries reveal a clear distinction between female social classes. At the top of the hierarchy were the women of royalty and nobility, The queen and the wives of high officials lived in the luxurious royal palace where they enjoyed certain privileges. Ancient documents show that some Assyrian queens even had significant influence in court, especially in matters related to royal succession. However, even for these privileged women, life was marked by limitations. Marriages were arranged as political alliances, serving the interests of the empire. Cuneiform tablets record various marriage treaties where princesses were sent to strengthen diplomatic ties with other kingdoms. A noblewoman's value was often measured by her ability to generate male heirs to continue the royal line. Polygamy was a common reality among the Nineveh elite. Part 6, approx 1,000 words. Assyrian kings maintained a royal harem, a practice that demonstrated power and status. Historical records indicate that the royal palace had a specific wing known as the House of Women, where the king's secondary wives and concubines lived. This system reflected the fundamental inequality in Assyrian society. For women of the lower classes, the reality was even more restrictive. Their daily lives were dedicated to housework, caring for children, and, in some cases, working in the fields. The texts found tell us that these women had little or no autonomy over their lives. Marriages were arranged by their families, often without their consent, and often at very young ages. A particular aspect of Nineveh society was the presence of priestesses in the temples. However, this religious position did not necessarily mean greater freedom or social status. The priestesses were subordinate to a religious hierarchy dominated by men, and their functions were strictly controlled by the main priests. The stone reliefs and sculptures found in Nineveh show how women were portrayed in official art. While men were represented in scenes of battle, hunting, and important rituals, women appeared mainly in domestic contexts or as part of religious processions. This artistic representation clearly reflects the established social roles in Assyrian society. If you are still here in the video, it is because God has a purpose for you. Comment below, Jesus is coming back. The next chapter will reveal even darker practices that took place in the temples of Nineveh, showing how Assyrian society mixed violence with religion in a way that would shock anyone today. Historical records reveal the darkest side of Nineveh society, documented in detail through Assyrian reliefs and texts themselves. The walls of the palaces of Nineveh tell a story that the rulers themselves wanted to preserve, although today these practices seem shocking to us. The Assyrian army developed an elaborate system of psychological terror. The reliefs found in the North Palace show scenes of prisoners being publicly tortured. These were not symbolic representations. They were historical records that the Assyrians used to document their power. Archaeologists have found inscriptions detailing how these practices were part of a calculated military strategy to discourage revolts. Religion in Nineveh was intrinsically linked to the power of the state. The Temple of Ishtar, whose ruins were discovered by archaeologists, was one of the largest religious complexes in the city. Cuneiform tablets found at the site describe elaborate rituals to the goddess Ishtar, whom the ancient texts call the Queen of Heaven and Earth. Ishtar was worshipped through ceremonies that mixed religious aspects with practices that reflected her role as a goddess of war and fertility. The Library of Ashurbanipal, discovered in the ruins of Nineveh, contains thousands of cuneiform tablets that document Assyrian religious practices. There is evidence of purification rituals in the temples, including animal sacrifices documented in religious texts preserved in the Library of Ashurbanipal. These texts also mention how certain ceremonies were performed before military campaigns, seeking divine favor for conquests. The social structure of Nineveh allowed the elite to exercise significant control over the population. The palaces contained specific rooms where the Assyrian kings received tributes and punished those who rebelled against their rule. Reliefs show long lines of prisoners and conquered peoples bringing offerings to the Assyrian rulers. Type in the comments, "I learned from history," if you understood how the society of Nineveh teaches us about the consequences of a civilization that deviates from divine principles. In the next chapter, we will see how all this structure of power and violence eventually led to the fall of this powerful city. Part 7. Approximately 1,000 words. Archaeological discoveries in Nineveh have revolutionized our understanding of ancient Assyrian civilization. The Palace of Sargon II, revealed in the excavations, features impressive architecture with monumental halls decorated with stone reliefs. These sculpted panels tell stories of battles, religious ceremonies, and the daily life of Assyrian royalty. The Library of Ashurbanipal is considered the first systematic library in history. Archaeologists have discovered more than 30,000 preserved clay tablets containing texts on medicine, astronomy, literature, and administrative records. This extraordinary collection allows us to understand the advanced level of knowledge that the Ninevites possessed. The reliefs found in the palaces are particularly revealing, showing detailed scenes of royal hunts, military campaigns, and religious rituals. Each sculpture is a window to the past, revealing everything from the elaborate hairstyles and clothing to the military tactics and cultural practices of the Assyrians. The story of Nineveh teaches us a timeless lesson. Here was a city that reached the height of world power with immense wealth and advanced knowledge. However, its material greatness contrasted with its moral decadence. The same city that produced magnificent works of art and scientific texts was also the scene of cruelty and injustice. This biblical story shows us that the true progress of a civilization cannot be measured only by its material achievements. Nineveh had everything: power, wealth, knowledge, but it lacked the most important thing: justice and fear of God. If the story of Nineveh has impressed you, you need to know another city that challenged God in an even more shocking way. Click on the video that is appearing on your screen now and discover what life was like in the Tower of Babel. You will be amazed to discover how those people tried to reach the heavens with their own hands and why God had to intervene in a way that changed the history of humanity forever. Click now.